I have no idea how this reading is going to turn out, but we'll take a look at it. This is a book called Letter to a New President. It was U.S. Senator Robert C. Byrd wrote it. He's passed away, but he was a long-time U.S. Senator for West Virginia. United States Senator Robert C. Byrd is the longest-serving member of the Senate in the history of our great republic. Now, this was written, obviously, when he was still alive. This book was published in, I don't know if it tells me on the cover here. At this time, he was a 9-term senator from West Virginia, serving since 1959. He is the longest-serving senator in history. He held more leadership positions in the U.S. Senate than any other senator in history, including the office of President Pro Temp, Senate Majority and Minority Leader, Senate Majority and Minority Whip, and Chairman of the Senate Appropriations Committee. Appropriations Committee would be people that decide on where money goes, and he did a lot for West Virginia in terms of appropriations. He lived through 2 world wars, the Great Depression, the Civil Rights Movement, the Cold War, the resignation of a U.S. president, you know who that was, the 9/11 terrorist attacks, and the traumatic military conflicts around the globe, including Iraq and Vietnam. He was 90 years old when he wrote this, and he wanted to share his common sense lessons he learned from the unique vantage point in history, from his unique. Of course, he didn't live to see the coronavirus. Now, that's kind of a game changer. You guys, it's a horrible thing, but it's something in history that you will forever mark your life, everyone's life. In the letter to a new president, Byrd recounts lessons drawn from his remarkable life as a young boy growing up poor in the coal fields of southern West Virginia. So he grew up right here. To his meteoric rise to the pinnacles of power in Washington, D.C., Byrd focuses his observations on underappreciated and seldom discussed virtues like personal responsibility, careful consideration before making decisions, and a sense of decency and fairness even toward fierce opponents. A student of history and a defender of our Constitution, Byrd looks to the past for lessons, and in Letters to a New President studies present failures as guides for constructive lessons for the future. This book will help the next president grapple with the heavy demands of the office. He also wrote something called Child of the Appalachian Coalfields and Confronting a Reckless and Arrogant Presidency. Woo. Letter to a New President. Common Sense Lessons for Our Next Leader. Letter to a New President, copyright 2008 by Robert C. Byrd and Steve Ketterman. So it looks to me like it was basically published about the time that about the time that President Obama took office. So I guess that's kind of who it's addressed to. Dear New President is what it's going to start with, page 1. He has some quotes in the beginning. They're worth sharing, I think. Show me a true patriot, and I will show you a lover not merely of his own country, but of all mankind. Do you agree with that? That was a Scottish patriot, Andrew Fletcher, in 1707 came up with that. Cicero said, to be ignorant of what happened before you were born is to be ever a child. So, in other words, history is important. Don't be ignorant of what happened before you. The way in which the world is imagined determines at any particular moment what men will do. And that's Walter Lippmann. That may be low over my head, I'm not sure. The way in which the world is imagined determines at any particular moment what men will do. So it's what's in our heads that determines our actions, I guess. To be read on Tuesday, January 20th, 2009. Dear New President. So that was on the day that Barack Obama would have taken office. Dear New President, each of the 11 presidents I have known personally, from my favorite, Harry Truman, to your immediate predecessor, found himself standing before God on Inauguration Day, reciting the oath of office hand on the Bible. Well, right off the bat, Mr. Byrd and I are on a little bit of a different, we have a difference of opinion. Harry Truman can never be one of my favorite presidents because of the dropping of atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And I know there were reasons for it, but I'm not going to. So, hand on the Bible and confronting the startling reality that no man or woman can ever truly be prepared for the awesome responsibility of what now falls on your shoulders. I am quite certain that for a time at least, every new president must feel as humble and naked as Woodrow Wilson did his first night in the White House. Wilson, an irascible old idealist, whatever that is, held no inaugural ball, setting aside a tradition established by James Madison in 1809, on the grounds that he distrusted such aggrandizement. And on his first night as occupant of the White House, Wilson was startled to discover that the presidential trunk had been misplaced and would, in fact, not be delivered until 1 a.m. Wilson went to bed that night without benefit of night clothes, as his biographer noted. To cite my King James Bible, naked I came out of my mother's womb, and naked I shall return thither. The Lord gave, and the Lord hath taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Job 1:21. I hope that for you too, the first night in the White House as president will be a deeply humbling experience. There will be time soon enough to learn what Thomas Jefferson had in mind when he spoke of the splendid misery of being president. I think you can do much worse than to emulate Gerald Ford, a man perpetually underestimated, who was never shy about looking to God for spiritual guidance, but also never made showy public displays of his faith. Ford was inaugurated on August 9th, 1974, after Richard Nixon resigned. and told a traumatized nation that day, "Our long national nightmare is over. Our Constitution works." Ford marked his first night in the White House by kneeling and saying the same words he had recited nightly since he was a lad in Michigan. "Trust in the Lord with all thine heart. Lean not on thine own understanding, but in all thy ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct thy path." That's Proverbs 3, verses 5 through 6. John Adams was the first president to live in the White House, moving in on November 1st, 1800, before work had even been completed on the lavish new presidential residence. The next morning, Adams wrote to his wife Abigail, "I pray heaven to bestow the best of blessings on this house and all that shall hereafter inhabit it. May none but honest and wise men ever rule under this roof." He probably shouldn't have said men, but that's okay. Harry Truman was the greatest president in my lifetime, as I will explore further in this letter. See, I'm going to continue to disagree. Maybe he'll try to change my mind on that. Maybe he'll change your mind on that. He awakened on May 8th, 1945, which was both his 61st birthday and his first morning at the White House as president, and at 9 a.m. went on the radio to announce that World War II was over in Europe. He also called on the country to make the following Sunday a day of prayer. The Allied armies, through sacrifice and devotion, and with God's help, have wrung from Germany a final and unconditional surrender, Truman told a national radio audience. "For the triumph of spirit of arms which we have won, and for its promise of the peoples everywhere who join us in the love of freedom, it is fitting that we as a nation give thanks to Almighty God, who has strengthened us and given us the victory." Now, what war are they talking about? World War II. "I call upon the people of the United States, whatever their faith, to unite in offering joyful thanks to God for the victory we have won, and to pray that He will support us to the end of our present struggle and guide us into the ways of peace. We still need to be guided in the ways of peace. Pray now and pray often, new President. Pray for success, yes, but pray also for our enemies. Pray for the likes of Iran's Mohammed Ahmadinejad and Hugo Chavez of Venezuela, and pray for yourself that you may better understand such leaders and the forces that drive them. Pray every day that you may gain a deeper humility with every new crisis and challenge you face in office. Pray not vainly or to seek advantage, but pray with an open heart and an open mind. Recall the wisdom of Tolstoy, who said, "Love that in you which is in all of us, and you will come one step closer to loving God." A president not only must have a spine like steel and a mind that is always reaching for new insight and new wisdom, he or she must above all have a faith that is unerring, unfailing, and unbreakable, because that faith will be tested every day in the White House. My own faith has been my bedrock since I was a boy growing up in the coal fields of southern West Virginia. I have a child's faith in God, and like President Ford, I say my prayers every night before I turn in, as I have since my early days in Wolf Creek Hollow, when the man and woman I thought were my parents instilled in me a deep respect for the good book's wisdom. Life in the mining camps in West Virginia was meager. My mom was a stern, upright, religious woman who kissed me only once in her life. My dad was the greatest man I ever knew and taught me every day by example the importance of humility and faith. I leaned back. I learned back in Wolf Creek Hollow that it was a sin to believe that one is infallible. Not even Jesus Christ himself claimed to be infallible. We humans are normal beings, racked with knowledge that we are forever doomed to fall short in our aspirations, but also forever soaring with fresh hope that we can create ourselves anew. This is the American story, the all-important chronicle of who we are, but nowhere except in the twisted mockery is it ever claimed that we are incapable of making mistakes. If we saw ourselves that way, we would be claiming to be gods. Any serious appreciation of the Bible reminds us that every person and every president must find the moral courage to take a hard look at mistakes made so that he or she can learn from them. I have lived with the weight of my own youthful mistakes my whole life, like a millstone around my neck, and I accept that those mistakes will forever be mentioned when people talk about me. I believe I have learned from those mistakes. I know I've tried very hard to do so. He's probably talking about that when he was young, he was in the Ku Klux Klan, briefly, I think. Maybe we'll talk about that more in the book, I don't know. Only dictators and kings can get away with never having to admit their mistakes. The people will never trust you if you can't honestly admit your own mistakes. Harry Truman had a sign on his desk in the White House, "The buck stops here." And to him it was a way of life, not a slogan suggested by a slick spin man. John Kennedy was on the hot seat when in the 1961 Bay of Pigs invasion of Fidel Castro's young communist government turned into a fiasco. Kennedy faced the fire. One cannot watch presidential news conference nowadays without a shudder of unease to see how far these sessions have fallen since the old days when my friend President Kennedy ushered in the television age with his magnetic performances before the cameras. President Eisenhower actually gave the first televised press conference for you history buffs on January 19, 1955. On January 25, 1961, President Kennedy held the first live presidential news conference in our history. Kennedy was eloquent and articulate and knew how to spar with a hostile reporter without shortchanging the right of the American people to hear their president held accountable to the public. The press wanted answers during his Friday morning news conference on April 21, 1961, just one day after the failed invasion of Cuba turned into a propaganda bonanza for Castro and a black eye for the United States internationally. Kennedy fended off repeated questions about the Bay of Pigs, but did not shy away from taking full responsibility. There's an old saying that victory has 100 fathers and defeat is an orphan. I like that. Kennedy said, do you know what that's kind of saying? Nobody wants to take responsibility for being defeated, so defeat is an orphan. It's orphaned. It's forgotten by everybody. Kennedy said, further statements, detailed discussions are not to conceal responsibility because I am the responsible officer of the government, and that is quite obvious, but merely because I do not believe that such a discussion would benefit us during the present difficult situation. That kind of acceptance of responsibility must be the foundation for any administration that would endeavor to be respected and trusted by the people, and above all, to have the authority and legitimacy essential to the office of the presidency. It was a downfall of the George W. Bush administration that the president had such trouble ever admitting to a mistake, and in fact made a great show of promoting officials who had badly botched their duties instead of reprimanding or firing them. Okay, so which Bush is that we're talking about? The second one. The first one was Herbert Walker Bush. That's the daddy. He's passed away. And we always call him W. Bush, George W. Bush. So he's kind of critical of George W. Bush, saying, and he was the president before Obama, saying that he didn't take responsibility for his actions. And that sometimes he would promote people who did things bad rather than firing them, which that's kind of an odd thing. But I'm going to leave it at that for today. I think we're going to read this book each day or on a semi-regular basis for the remainder of this period of the coronavirus reading period, we'll call it. Maybe we'll get back to school before we finish the book, maybe not. Thank you.